by cable, provided as a public service.
Washington Journal continues.
We're joined now by Congressman Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat from Ohio, for a conversation about progressives and their relationship with the president. But, Congressman, first I want to start with a hearing that's going on today in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, of which you're a part of, on Obama's green energy agenda. As a job creation tool, has the Obama administration's investments in this sector been worth it to you that you've seen?
Well, investments sometimes take a while to get a return. I mean, I favor a much more aggressive approach in getting NASA involved with a larger budget, where NASA would be an incubator of green technology and then license or sell it to the private sector to create millions of new jobs in wind and solar microtechnologies, so many different energy technologies we could, you know, that we could take a new direction with. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Solyndra hearing today. I'll be listening carefully to the testimony.
How much pause should Solyndra give the Obama administration? There's been a lot of concern. Your committee is thinking about stepping in and doing its own investigation. The Energy and Commerce Committee launched an investigation back in the spring, but the chairman, the Republican chairman, has said he's thinking about doing an investigation. How much pause?
Well, if you have a $500 million loan that goes south, you should look at it. But there were investors there. There were people in the private sector who felt there was some worth. So I don't want to prejudge the testimony. I want to listen to the testimony and join with my colleagues in asking questions. But as far as a green energy approach, are you kidding? I mean, if we don't move towards a green energy, then we're trapped by oil. And with peak oil being a reality, our choice is we're either going to ruin the earth, plunder it, increase pollution, be in more wars, or we're going to make a transition towards a greener and cleaner economy and create jobs doing it. But right now, we are in a rut caused by an addiction to oil, and it was a few years ago that Wall Street was cautioning investors, don't go green, stay with oil, stay with nuclear, stay with and coal, which all are quite problematic in terms of the environmental impact. So it's time that we cannot let, whatever happens in this hearing with Solyndra, we cannot let it be the basis for trying to wreck all of the worthy enterprises that are out there and that are trying to take America and its economy in a direction that's more sustainable.
Again, we're talking to Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat from Ohio, who's a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and Education and Workforce Committee as well. If you want to join in on the conversation on the Democratic line, give us a call, 202-737-0001, Republican line 202-737-0002, the Independent line 202-628-0205, and if you're outside the United States, 202-628-0184. Congressman, I want to stick on that subject for just a little bit longer. There's been reports coming out starting last night about Republican members of the Oversight Committee, including Chairman Issa, who sent letters to the Department of Energy advocating for clean energy, green energy projects in their districts. Surprising to you?
Well, I would hope that members on both sides of the aisle would be strongly in favor of a transition in our economy away from oil dependency and towards actually lowering the cost of utility rates, lowering the amount of pollution that's out there, which would have a favorable impact on our global climate. We should be united on this because we're all affected by the environmental impact of pollution, which comes from the burning of hydrocarbons.
But with the amount of criticism on green energy, it doesn't surprise you that they...
Look, today there'll be a fight over one loan. And Congress has a right to inspect what happened with that loan. It was over $500 million. We sure should ask questions. But I think that most members realize that we cannot let the foibles over a single loan deter us from engaging in a concerted effort to move our economy in a direction that's more sustainable and more financially independent. And so we really should not let this hearing frame a debate over whether or not we use green energy. That would be ridiculous.
Well, one of the green energy projects that's has been under criticism out there is the loan program for alternative energy vehicles. This is what has been the subject of some of the cuts that Republicans want to make for disaster aid funding. How is this going to play out? This is an article from today, actually, in the Baltimore Sun. The fight over disaster aid stirs fears of a shutdown in Congress again.
Well, the American people have a right to expect that within our political system, that Democrats and Republicans will find a way to settle differences and keep the country going forward. I mean, that's not an extravagant expectation, frankly. It's what we're supposed to do. Now, are there real differences? Yes, there are. But we've got to find a way to work towards, through those differences. And there's bigger issues at stake here. I mean, there are well, we're talking about a government shutdown in Washington. There's 6.5 million Americans who are on the verge of losing their homes. There's 14 million Americans who are out of work. And there's millions of young people who will not have the chance to go to college because their families don't have the resources anymore. You know, and there's the elderly who are worried about Social Security. We have to start focusing on the practical aspirations of people and be careful that these internecine political battles, which occur on Capitol Hill, do not become an end game in and of themselves. We've got to keep our eye on the bigger picture, which includes, by the way, ending the wars once and for all. So I'm hopeful that there'll be a way to work out the differences.
Well, you say a big part of that is wanting to get people back to work. What do you make of the president's plan that he's put forth to get America back to work and his deficit reduction plan he introduced this week?
Well, let's look at the deficit reduction plan first. $1.1 trillion of it is to end the wars or to draw them down. Look, at the same time, we hear reports that the United States may be in Afghanistan through 2024, that there's a real push inside Washington to stay in Iraq. The policy will drive the numbers. So, it was 10 years ago. I have this analysis of a joint resolution on Iraq that I gave the members of Congress 10 years ago, stating there was no reason to go to war against Iraq. We will spend, according to Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and his associate Linda Bilmes, over $3 trillion on that war. We're still in Iraq. Get out of Iraq, and then you have some credibility on those budget numbers. Get out of Afghanistan, and then you have credibility on the budget numbers, because that's a big part of the deficit reduction. Now, on the jobs side, with 14 million unemployed, it's good that the president will spend $140 billion, I believe it is, on infrastructure, but we need shovel-ready projects. We need to get people to work now. I don't know how much of that will be immediately in the pipeline. Keep in mind that it was when Congressman Oberstar was the chairman of the Transportation Committee, he had a $500 billion transportation bill, which couldn't get the administration's approval. That had a lot of shovel-ready projects in it. The people in administration felt it was too big. We need something on the scale of what Jim Oberstar proposed 2 years ago to get America back to work. And I introduced a bill yesterday in the House of Representatives.
And I want to get into the NEED Act.
That is aimed at creating millions of new jobs by taking a different approach with our monetary policy that would enable the government at once to finally regain its constitutional presence, to be able to invest in our own country and not keep having to depend on banks who, frankly, are strangling the American economy in their own interest.
Let's get into the details of that in a second. But first, a few calls. On the Republican line, Bill from Alexandria, Virginia. Go ahead, Bill. Bill, you there? We'll head over to the independent line. We'll get Ed on the independent line from Washington, Indiana. Ed, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Ed.
Doing real good. Mr. Kucinich, I wish that I lived in a district where I could vote for you. I agree with almost everything you stand for and what you do. But I'll tell you, the fact that we don't have the pipeline for natural gas along our interstate systems to use American natural gas, really, it just burns me up. We can't keep taking these energy shocks. The general people out here that are working for a living, and the United States has no energy policy. I don't know what we've been doing since the first Arab embargoes back in the 70s. I mean, I sat in lines for, hours, and we're still doing nothing. It's like nobody's home. I wish you had more ability to do things and get things straightened out.
Thanks, Ed. Congressman, what can you do?
Well, first of all, we need an American energy policy, and we need to invest in a transition in our economy away from energy resources that would ruin the environment, which, frankly, creates a cost in individuals in terms of their own personal health. The air that we breathe gets polluted, the water that we drink can get polluted by certain energy sources. So we need a new energy policy. We need a new manufacturing policy where the maintenance of steel, automotive, aerospace, and shipping is deemed as vital to our national security. We need a new trade policy where we get out of NAFTA, GATT, the WTO, and cancel China trade and renegotiate all of our trade agreements and make them contingent on workers' rights, the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, the right to strike, on human rights, the right to prohibitions on child and slave labor, and on environmental quality principles, protections of the air and water. We have a race to the bottom otherwise. And so, and we need a different monetary policy, so we're not hamstrung by banks, both the big banks here in this country and banks internationally. So, the caller is right in anticipating that there's something absolutely wrong in America that isn't being addressed. But if you take a systems approach and look at it in a broad way, there's so many different areas where we need to work on simultaneously, and a different foreign policy too.
Well, another question coming in on Twitter is, do we need new poverty programs? What kind of poverty programs are you in strong support of?
Jobs. A job is the solution to poverty for individuals, for the country. We need to get America back to work. So the bill that I introduced yesterday, I'd like to talk about, if I may, is called the NEED Act, the National Employment Emergency Defense Act, that would put the Fed back, it would put the Fed under Treasury, so it wouldn't have this ability to be able to give $1.2 trillion to banks secretly. Bloomberg News found out about it and unearthed it. That this financial game wouldn't be an end game in itself, and that the government would at last take back the power it gave away in 1913 to be able to invest directly to create the jobs. Just think about this, John. Why should we be borrowing money from banks when the Constitution of the United States gives the power to coin money or create money to the Congress, and we ought to, as a government, be investing in our own country. We should not have to go to China to borrow money and invest in America. We should create the wealth in our own country. There shouldn't be any level of unemployment here. We should be able to get America back to work, and this is something I've got the bill in. I introduced it yesterday.
As I understand, the bill would essentially dismantle the Federal Reserve, correct, and move it under Treasury, and do away with the bond market, correct?
Well, no, it would create a separate monetary authority. People could still, invest in various private projects that have to do with the bond market. This isn't about eliminating the bond market by any means, but it is a way of creating millions of good-paying jobs, of paying off the national debt, of reducing federal deficits, of ending the fiscal crisis, and having the dollar be a stable currency. But the Fed right now is out of control. The Fed stood on the sidelines while a bubble was building, and banks were pyramiding their assets. And then when it collapsed, what did? They went to the taxpayer and they said, bail us out. Well, we still have banks that are too big to fail. We still have banks that are not loaning money or helping people stay in their homes. They're standing by, not standing by, they're pushing and accelerating the number of foreclosures so that they can clear out the housing market to set the stage for another boom-bust cycle. I reject that. We should have had mortgage modification in the works right from the beginning. We need to save American homes, but we need to do something else. Give people a chance to have a job so they can make their mortgage payment. Give people a chance to have a job so they can make their car payments and send their child to school so they don't have to worry about their own economic security. But our government hasn't been doing that. It's been letting a central bank play games with other banks so that banks can get bigger, they can do their mergers and acquisitions, but then to hell with Main Street. Well, that's not acceptable to me, and it's time that we had a government that really stood for the American people and didn't permit these banks to be running the country for their own benefit.
Let's get some reaction to that. John is a Republican from Leesburg, Virginia. John, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Congressman. It's a pleasure.
Morning.
I just wanted to make a comment about green energy. As a Republican who actually believes in green energy and would like to see the government get more involved. I recently have been looking into geothermal, which seems like a more economical way of the average family doing something green. And one of the things that I learned is that the cost of drilling for geothermal, it just makes it cost prohibitive. That is one area that it seemed to me that the government could possibly inject some money, and I hate to say it because I'm a Republican, but almost go into the geothermal business and drill these holes, drill the lines for the HVAC companies, and thus making it more affordable for the average homeowner to put in a geothermal system and get everybody off propane and even possibly natural gas. And I just think you'd have a lot more families getting into that industry. Thank you very much for letting me speak this morning.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the caller's interest in looking at alternatives. We need to have a search for alternatives. One of the things I just want to say that I've been wondering about, and I'm not a scientist, but I see all of these earthquakes that occurred. We had this extraordinary earthquake a couple last month. I just wondered how much of that drilling, the fracking that takes place, has an impact on Mother Earth herself. Now, how much can you do that endlessly without having any geological impacts? I'm not sure of that. These are things that I'd like to see. I'd like to see more science on, because if you think about oil as helping to lubricate the movement of various strata inside the Earth, if you in your own body start to get rid of your synovial fluid, you start to get creaky. And we're messing with Mother Earth in a way that I don't know that nature really ever intended, and I have some concerns about the environmental impact of a lot of this drilling that we do.
Well, Felix is a Democrat from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Good morning, Felix.
Representative Kucinich, C-SPAN America. Good morning. How are you on this wonderful day?
Fantastic.
It is a wonderful day, and it's good to hear from you.
Thank you very much. We're here at the home of the 82nd and all the special forces that when y'all need us, we're there on the call us and we're there within a few hours. If you allow me just enough time like you do the Republicans, I want to inject a few facts into here. Mr. Kucinich, get your pen out and write if you would. Wall Street Journal, January 9, 2009. Sudeep Reddy. He went through the payroll records employment records for the Department of Labor from 1939 on until end of Bush 41. And if you allow me these three quick statistics to show you who has the best policy, everyone's the worst president on the Democratic side. Well, he created more jobs than Bush 41, Bush 43, or Eisenhower by 1.5 million during his term, 2.1 million during his per year in office, and increased payroll by 9.2%. Last statistic, please bear with me.
Go for it.
There have been 6 Republican presidents that for 36 years, and 5 Democratic Republicans for the 28 years, but the Democrats outperformed the Republicans by 21.
We're losing you there, Felix, but Congressman, did you want to make a comment before we go to the next call?
We should be focusing on job creation right now and wealth creation. We shouldn't have the level of poverty that we have in America right now. I was looking at some figures. Just listen to these figures. 120 million Americans literally have no wealth, just debts. 150 million Americans have less wealth than the top 400 individuals. And finally, 13,400 top households have more yearly income than the bottom 96 million Americans. So the problem is, it's a systemic problem where the wealth in America is getting into fewer and fewer hands. The middle class, Pew Charitable Trust had a report, John, recently that said a third of the young people who are born into the middle class aren't going to remain there. They're just going to fall out the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you don't have jobs, you don't have housing, you don't have a path to education, that's a problem.
Well, is this president doing enough? I mean, you've made comments fairly recently that this president could perhaps use a primary challenge to move him in the right direction from what you said. Well,
I have said that, and I stand by that. But I also want to say that when the president's trying to create jobs, we certainly should support that effort. The scale of job creation that's needed in order to bring unemployment down to a point where the country's not in critical condition economically. The scale has to be much larger. We need a scale of a new deal that would put millions back to work. Now, some in the administration will say that the American Recovery Act helped. It did help. We helped put teachers back to work. Very important. Help subsidize budgets, in effect, of other governments for police and fire. That's very important. The big argument is, where's the money coming from? That goes back to my proposal. Why should the government have to borrow money from banks to keep our economy moving? If the banks are giving us a hard time, if the real question becomes, who's running America? Are the banks running America, where they can choke off credit to Main Street, where they can engage in mergers and acquisitions, where the central bank can send money, $1.2 trillion, including money overseas, where last week they put more money for foreign banks? How about taking care of this country? Let the government be in a business of creating the jobs that the private sector isn't. And the government, as it primes the pump of the economy, helps bring the private sector back. So we're not doing enough right now. And I think
well, is the president moving in the right direction? We got a tweet here from Dr. D, UNC 1220, who asked, why are Dems wimps now in comparison to 1968, when they were willing to run against a Democratic president who was a warmonger like Obama? Are Democrats wimps right now? Do you have an idea of who should run against the president in a primary?
Well, from my perspective, I can maintain honest policy difference with the President of the United States, but it doesn't require that I run against him. I think that it's important to challenge the President's policies, to help suggest a direction that would help restore our cities, would put people back to work, would protect our basic industries. Unfortunately, the administration's been promoting these trade agreements that move more jobs out of the country. We have to stop the direction that we're going in, which is the wrong economic direction. And I think does the president have the capacity to do it? Of course he does. Whether or not his economic advisors, who are famously in some kind of debate all the time about which way to go, will give him the best set of options is another question.
Well, let's put it bluntly. Would you agree with this headline in Politico from Monday after the president's speech, Obama and the left back in sync?
I don't know what that means. I mean, this is, I tell you, as someone who has a commitment to public service, these labels really don't mean much. Liberal, conservative. Tell me what you stand for. I want to see what the president is doing. The idea of being back in sync, I don't know. I mean, I want to see the results. That's all. Get people back to work. Make sure our basic industries are protected. End these wars which sap the ability of the country to be able to meet its needs. Think of all the money we've spent on war. There are some people who say, well, they're opposed to the war, but we're spending money on the wars in the meantime. If we stop spending the money on the wars and redirect it to our domestic economy, we wouldn't be in this mess that we're in. So I want to see, let's take care of things here. Let's bring our troops back, not just from the wars. Let's these bases all over the world. Look, we should be invoicing those countries for our military being there and getting the money and being in a position of strengthening our economy. America should not be in the difficulty it's in today. It's just the policies have been wrong, and it's been wrong with both parties, frankly, and we need a shift away from the status quo on monetary policy, on trade policy, on defense or wars, on energy, job creation. America still can do. But we have to take a different direction to do it.
Again, we're talking with Ohio Congressman Dennis Kucinich. You can follow him on Twitter at Rep Kucinich. Going back to the phones on the Republican line, Watson is from Vidalia, Georgia. Good morning, Watson. Watson, you there?
Hello. Hello, Vidalia. Great onions.
We'll go to the independent line. Don is an independent. Good morning, Don. You're from Greenville, Ohio, correct?
Yes, I am.
Do you have a question for the congressman?
I have a question on Social Security and a couple other things. And good morning, Dennis.
Good morning. How's things in Greenville?
Oh, pretty good.
Good.
Why do they keep really attacking Social Security when it's really not in trouble, and they just keep throwing it out there that it's in trouble and it's in trouble and it's in trouble, and it's probably can go on for And if everybody got to work, there wouldn't be any problem. And in that line, why are we giving breaks to people working, which takes money out of Social Security? And another thing, I was talking about being president, and also there is millions of dollars spent to run for president, and since you people work for us, I have an idea that if everybody had so much money to spend to run for president, in other words, we give so much money that you can run for president, and that's all you get, it would take out the corporations that are involved. It would take out the millionaires and billionaires, and everybody would be treated the same.
Well, Congressman, a lot of questions
well,
there.
I wrote notes. There's 3 questions. First, Social Security. You're right. Social Security is rock solid for many years to come. And all the talk about trying to break public confidence in Social Security, I think is really aimed at trying to open the door for Wall Street to be able to gain access to Social Security's assets, privatize Social Security, turn it into a private pension plan, and that would essentially deprive the Americans who are in that system of the full benefits which they have a right to expect from a lifetime of work. Now, secondly, you raised a point about the fact that one of the tax breaks that comes in is actually a tax breaks that so money isn't paid into the Social Security trust fund. You're right, that's a problem. I mean, that's not a good choice in order to prime the pump of the economy that could have an adverse effect long-term on Social Security's finances. The third thing you talked about was how we finance presidential elections, and for that matter, federal elections. Look, right now, our country is like an auction, and offices often go to the highest bidder. If you have public financing of elections, as you suggest, you have public control over the political process. If you have private financing of elections, you have private control of the political process. When the founders constructed this country, I don't think they could have imagined the kind of wealth that would try to be intervening in between the people and their government. And today, we have to rescue our government by having exactly the kind of system that you're suggesting. This is one of the reasons why the C-SPAN program is so great, because the people have an idea of what's going on right now. They know the corporations are running the government, and they know that corporate money rules. The Citizens United case was just an example of how far away we've gotten from our mission, where corporations actually have more power than the average voter because they can use their money to influence the outcome of elections.
Well, I want to ask you about the idea of priming the pump for the economy. There's a few points of your NEED Act here that we want to go through, that you want to create the monetary authority, create full employment economy, abolish the creation of money by private persons through lending against deposits, enable the federal government to invest or lend new money into circulation, incorporate the Federal Reserve into the executive branch. But another provision I read in there was this initial monetary dividend provision. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, we don't have to have any poverty. I mean, we could guarantee that people have the ability to be able to support their families if they fall on tough times. Why should we have poverty in America?
And is that what this provision does? Is this a direct stimulus into the economy?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
To what number? I mean, how much money are we talking about?
For whatever
here?
we need. That's the point. We have control over this, and it's whatever we need. We have an unlimited...
Wouldn't Republicans say that the government's just going to ask for whatever you'll be willing to give?
Oh, no. I mean, there's obviously management. There has to be a monetary authority that just, you know, today you want to decide how much money should go into the economy, but what does it go for is the question. And so there would be a way of managing it, but guess what? Instead of, and I think the Republicans are concerned about this, instead of looking at a central bank, which is a rule and a law unto itself, which doesn't really have a connection to the practical aspirations of people. You know, when the Federal Reserve was created, this was supposed to have something to do with having a moderating effect, at least an encouraging effect, to create jobs. Hasn't done that. And what the Fed's famous for is looking the other way while the banks were pyramiding their assets and exposing the American economy to the kind of precipitous drop it took at the end of 2008.
Concerned about political influence on the central bank? This is from the Financial Times today. Republicans warned the central bank on stimulus, that they sent a letter over to the Fed essentially warning them not to do another stimulus.
Well, look, I look at that as episodic as compared to what I'm proposing, which is a broad change that would finally regain control of our country from Wall Street and the banks. This is really a question of a democracy. You cannot have a political democracy if you don't have an economic democracy. And with poverty growing in America, with more Americans going to bed hungry, with more Americans losing their jobs, with more Americans losing their homes, with retirement security in jeopardy for so many Americans, we have to get control of the levers of monetary power in order for us to be able to move the economy forward in the interests of the American people. But when we have China outpacing us in the creation of new high-tech jobs, when we have to go to other countries to borrow money to be able to keep our economy going, something's wrong here. And my bill that I put in, it's H.R. 2990, the NEED Act, is a step, a dramatic step in a direction to finally get control of our economy and be in a position where we can help incentivize jobs in the private sector. You know, I'm not for the government usurping the potential of the private sector. I want to see the government be the incubator of jobs. I want to see the government provide capital so that the private sector can go. This is what this hearing is about today, Solyndra. Does the government have a role at all in helping to incentivize growth in the economy? I think there is. Do we have an obligation to monitor how the money is spent? Absolutely.
Jim is a Republican from Valencia, California. Jim, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Kucinich.
Morning.
And my comment first is it's obvious to me that majority of Republican leaders such as Jim DeMint, Eric Cantor, Mitch McConnell, and also John Boehner truly hates our president. Most Americans can see that. But I wanted to ask about Congressman Joe Walsh. And the question is, would you please, sir, would you please pimp slap him for me? Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Eldon on the Democratic line from Detroit, Michigan. Eldon, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Dennis.
Hi.
Thanks for being there for us. I'm right with you on everything. Doesn't seem like Republicans and Democrats are on the same page as far as putting this country back to work. Republicans are fighting, just fighting everything. No. I'm interested in as far as the lobbyists and Wall Street. Do they have such a stranglehold on the House and the Senate that nobody can get on the same page? I mean, everybody's hurting bad, just exactly like you said. And
the question on the 2012 election for you.
The short answer to your question about the influence of lobbyists in Wall Street and whether they have a stranglehold, the answer is yes, unfortunately. In today's news, I think in the previous program on C-SPAN, the C-SPAN went down the list of all of the corporations who have made contributions that would conceivably affect the work of the so-called super committee. Look, it ends up being a lobbyist carnival. Unfortunately, let me give you an example. When China trade was being passed, John, you know, for you basketball fans out there, imagine 5 players to 1. You had 5 lobbyists. I think that's what it was. I think it was like 5 lobbyists, every member of the House.
Giving a full court press?
Well, how could you? Hello? How could you? I had to fight through a thicket of lobbyists just to be able to walk up the steps of the Capitol to be able to vote, and it was like Gucci Gulch gone wild. And so we have a country that the gentleman from Greenville called in about 10 minutes ago. He's right. We have to have public financing. Otherwise, we'll never control our government. We need to end this system of pay-to-play. We need to end the system where decisions go often to the highest contributor, person that or the interest that which contributes the most. We got to regain we got to take back our country.
Well, David's an independent from Atlanta, California. David, good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. My question is, I'm a current watcher, and I keep hearing economy, but I think I'm missing the point. The root word of economy is eco. It's something that's self-sustaining. Think about a lake. A lake needs certain things in order to survive, and the fish are in it. Now, as a country, we need to be self-sufficient. It's primarily basic. Make what we buy what we make. The simple necessities that we use, like steel, oil, gas, all the things that we need should be here. Those are lifelong jobs, generational jobs will put America back to work and families for generations on in. Instead of allowing corporations, this gentleman talked about lobbyists. Okay, constituents should be the people that the senators are in touch with. That's the people, the normal, average, everyday guy like me. Now, these CEOs and these lobbyists, they want to come and bring in their programs and stuff. They need to deal with the president. He's a CEO of a country, CEO to CEO.
Well, let's give the congressman a chance to respond.
The caller made a plea for self-sufficiency for our nation. You're absolutely right. I mean, what we know, the world's interconnected and interdependent. On the other hand, we're losing our self-sufficiency in America. One of the reasons why I'm so opposed to the World Trade Organization, the United States participating in it, is that the basis for the participation is that we can't pass laws here in this country that say, you know, we want an America First steel policy, which says if you want to rebuild America's infrastructure, it's only with U.S. steel, only with steel made in America. I mean, I heard a story recently about a bridge, a section of a bridge being, for the West Coast, being produced in another country. Why can't we make things here, create the jobs here, use the wealth that we have here to help our people have the jobs, have the send their children to schools, be able to have the health care that they need, be able to save a little money, be able to provide for their retirement security. See, this is where the lack of control of our economy, these trade agreements are designed, they were written by multinational corporations who don't want to pay people a decent wage, who don't want to have to deal with retirement benefits, who don't care about health care benefits. We have to get control of our economy again. That's why I said get out. End NAFTA, GATT, WTO, get out of China trade and renegotiate the whole thing, which says America has to be able to make things here, buy things here on a grand scale.
Well, just in the couple minutes we have left, I want to run through a couple quick questions. Somebody had brought up the upcoming election. Are you in for the toughest election of your electoral life? The redistricting lines look like you're going to be in a primary battle with one of your Democratic colleagues, Marcy Kaptur.
Well, she's a fine lady, a good public servant, and the way the lines were drawn, they gave the advantage to the Cleveland area. It was 54%. Our latest analysis, about 54% of the Democratic vote comes from my old district. 34% comes from my friend's district. So I have an advantage. Now, does that advantage mean that the election's easy? By no means. It's going to be it's a significant. It'll be a significant.
What are the
election.
lines of distinction that you're going to draw in this primary?
Well, I'm not going to do it here, and I will say that Marcy Kaptur is my friend, and I didn't draw the lines that put a part of Toledo into a district that included my political base in Cleveland. That wasn't my decision.
Can you say, I know on June 30th you had about $149,000 in the bank, almost twice what she had in the bank. What are you going to have with this upcoming reporting period at the end of this month?
I don't know. I let somebody else pay attention to those numbers. I'm not riveted on that. We try to raise money. We raise money actually most of it on the internet. What do you think you need
to defeat a fellow incumbent who's been around since?
John, I'm not going to go there because frankly, I'm sad about the way that this has turned out. I'm hopeful that, again, this is my friend. I know in politics it's so dog eat dog, but I can't look at it that way. And so, even though the Republicans who drew the map may have given me an advantage, there's no guarantee, A, and B, I'm still in a contest with a friend of mine. So, how do I feel about that? I'm not happy about that. And I'm sure not going to say anything on this program that would in any way attempt to diminish the fine public service that she gives to this country.
Well, let's talk about another potential job for you. Ron Paul had mentioned that he thought you might be a good fit for his cabinet. Now, I don't know, one of his spokesmen came out later and said he might have been joking about that, but your thoughts on those comments?
Well, Ron Paul and I have worked together in trying to stop the wars. I mean, think about that. And I think Democrat, Republican, or Independent, you know, you have to, I think people are paying more and more attention to presidential candidates who are saying, get out of Iraq, get out of Afghanistan, stop these foreign misadventures. And that's what Ron Paul said. I mean, he and I agree with that. We also agree on the danger of Fed policy. He and I were the two individuals in Congress, in the House in particular, who challenged the Fed's policies and tried to, and made a call for transparency as to how they were, you know, how they were creating money out of nothing, who they were giving it to. So Ron Paul is a great American. He's someone who deserves consideration for the things he says because, you know, more often than not on the international policy side, he's been right.
Would you say he's the Republican candidate in that field that you would agree with most right now?
Well, the Republicans have to make their own choice, but I can tell you this, that Ron Paul and I have worked together on trying to keep America out of wars. When you think about the fact that $3 trillion is the cost of the war in Iraq, according to Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, I mentioned this before with Linda Vilmas, the cost of the war in Afghanistan is already over $500 billion. Think if we would have listened, if people had listened to myself and Ron Paul about these wars, and instead of spending money on the wars, that they actually spent money to rebuild our American economy. Think of how much different our country would be today. We wouldn't be worried about whether the government's going to shut down. We wouldn't be worried about unemployment. We'd have America thriving. And you know what? We cannot keep pursuing this policy of trying to tell everybody else in the world what to do and forget to take care of things back here at home.
Well, let's, one other question on foreign policy. There's been reports in recent weeks that Gaddafi tried to reach out to you in the final days of his regime before Tripoli fell to work for peace. Can you tell us a little bit about
I
this
had both sides reaching out to me. People know that I opposed the war in Libya, and we had a bipartisan coalition in opposition to it because, you know, it was a constitutional question about whether any president has the right to take this country into war without following Article 1, Section 8, where the founders clearly stated that Congress has to make the decision about going to war. It's a financial question. We're in it for over $1 billion. We were told it was going to last days, not weeks, and now, you know, we could be looking soon at the first anniversary of the war in Libya. You know, so people in the Libyan government reached out to me to try to see if I would be willing to communicate to the administration their desire for a peaceful resolution and to take a different approach than the Gaddafi government had previously taken. And so I thought that was worth listening to. And I thought it was important to bring people together on both sides, which, you know, I was talking to both sides. It's very important that we try to find a way to peacefully resolve conflicts instead of believing that the ultimate solution to a conflict is going to be a gun. It seldom is.
Well, we're going to have to leave it right there. Appreciate you coming in to talk to us. Coming up next on C-SPAN, we've got Congressman Steve Chabot, Republican from Ohio, to discuss Republicans' expected UN vote on Palestinian statehood. But get updates on what's airing on all three C-SPAN networks by following @C-SPAN on Twitter. It's easy to sign up. Just go to twitter.com/C-SPAN now and hit follow to get all the scheduled updates. And of course, don't forget to follow Washington Journal @C-SPAN-WJ. And now, a news update from C-SPAN Radio.
It's 8:34 a.m. Eastern. An update on presidential politics. A new Quinnipiac telephone survey finds that Florida Republicans prefer Texas Governor Rick Perry by a slight margin over former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. This as the candidates head into tonight's Republican debate in Orlando. The new poll has a margin of error of plus or minus 5.1 percentage points. Meanwhile, President Obama heads to Ohio today to talk about his near $500 billion jobs proposal. He's set to speak from a bridge that links Ohio and Kentucky. Those are the home states of House Speaker John Boehner and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. The White House says that's not an accident. And on the state of the economy, new census data shows 20 and 30-somethings are experiencing the highest unemployment since World War II. The figures also show there are a record number of young adults moving in with their parents, delaying marriage, buying fewer homes, and raising kids out of wedlock. That report's set to be released today. Those are some of the latest headlines on C-SPAN Radio.